Hey, so a seamstress right here. Um, I've been in the throes of doing this wet items, right? And there are some things that came across my path during that that are very valuable tools, and I just have to share them. Um, I call it the personal touch. It's those old stitches that you have to do by hand. Well, they're priceless hand stitches. And one of those is called a couple different things. It's either the back stitching, a lot of people will call stitching, and I call it invisible finishing stitch because you don't see the stitches. So I'm going to do my best to show you how that's done. I am making a tie. That's right, I make ties to match the vest that I'm making for my son here on the table, for my husband to wear to my son's wedding. So the invisible stitch is extremely wonderful for two reasons. You can't really see the stitches if you look at what I've already done. And because it is a type of back stitching, I know it's a back stitch, it gives extra strength to your garment, because when you're making the stitch, you're going in, going out just a little bit, you come up, then you go back behind what you just did and reinforce it basically with another row of threads. Now, the one thing that you have to remember with hand stitching is consistency. Your stitches need to be consistent as best you can. Now, the invisible ones, you don't have to worry about it so much, but you don't want to make a huge gap in between. So typically for something small like this, like on a tie, I'm going to have them about 1/8 of an inch apart. So I have the flapped over on it, and I'm left-handed, so if you're right-handed, you flip it. You just do the opposite. The part that is overlaying the bottom layer, that's where I put my needle in first. But before you do that, you're going to take the needle and you go way underneath. It's going to sound strange. The reason why you do is you're going to go in underneath past where you're actually going to start stitching. So let me show you. Say this is the end of your fabric. This is where you're going to start your finishing stitching, your blind stitching, your hidden stitches. So you stick, because you've got a knot on the end of your thread, and you're going to put it inside, and it's going to come out in the crease where you have pressed it. On a tie, you really want to make sure that anytime you do the blind or invisible stitching, that you press what you're going to be stitching out of. It allows you to make it more snug and more accurate. So you pull it through this way. So I can get those to cooperate with me. So you pull that up. So that is just your attaching stitch. You have a knot on the end, you've put the needle with the thread in the back of that first piece, and you put it through. Now, you can do this one of two ways. Like I said, I'm left-handed, so this may be a little different for you all. Where I just came out, the flap that is overlapping, that's the one you go back to. Let me show you. You start with the overflap, then you go 1/8 of an inch into the to catch in the outside. This whole purpose of being invisible. You don't want to see the stitches on either side. So I took my needle and I went into the underlayer, okay? Came up through the overflap layer right at the crease. And you pull it up like that. Now there's the back stitch part. You probably would think, okay, so I'm going to tack it down right there. No. You're going to take the needle, you're going to go back in just where you just pulled it up, back into that creased area in the forward direction. In other words, my needle is going to go this way because I'm stitching down, right? I'm not stitching backwards, so I'm going to put it in, so I'm aiming it down where I just pulled it out of. Okay, so I'm in there, behind where I just came out, but where am I going to come up? I'm going to come up. Now the next stitch, so you're going to go back and forth. You go in there, then you come over to the folded one, and you come up in the underlayer, just like that. Then you go back into the fold, halfway between where you just came out and where you started. I'm going to try to show you the best I can. So I came out here, then I went over to the other side, picked that up, put my needle back in to go back up to this top, and then halfway. You come back up halfway up, you come up there. This is halfway between the two. Go back down and then pull it through. And you continue on doing that all the way down. So you're basically doing a half stitch backwards each time. So you're going back where you just came out of, halfway up. So as you go down, you have a half stitch and then a half stitch. So if you know how back stitch works, if you've done any crewel embroidery, that's how that works. Now and this is the same kind of stitch that is used, and I lost my scissors again. Oh, where did I put those things? I keep losing them. But that's how you do on a tie. Now you can do the exact same thing when you're doing a vest. You know how on the instructions it tells you on the vest, you leave like just the side seams open and you pull the whole thing through, and then you get to close up that little seam that you just left open. And I think first time I had to do it, I go, why can't I just put it in the sewing machine? Well, for two reasons. Now this is the vest, and when I turn it right side out, this is the inside. That's not machine stitched. The other side, the right side, is the one that gets machine stitched. Okay, because that's the finished edge. I mean, that's what you want to see. On the inside, if you're doing it for just yourself or a family member, you're not really too concerned about the look, then you can, if you want, you actually could, if you line them up right, you can line up where this flapped over piece of the lining is, press it really good, and do a quilting stitch called stitch in the ditch. So you stitch that real close, but you got to make sure that it lines up with the ditch on the other side. It can be done. It takes a lot of finesse. You can always try to stitch in the ditch from the right side to the wrong side, but that never works out. I've tried it. So there is also what's called a whip stitch or a cast over stitch. Now I'm just going to demonstrate with this. I'm not going to finish this vest like this, but same thing. Whenever you are doing hand stitches and you put the little knot in the end, the knot has to be concealed. So you lock that knot underneath. The way you do that is you go further down. You don't, not where your first stitch is actually going to be, away. Because then when you come down, you enclose it. Let me show you. You take the needle and you put it right in where you're wanting to whip stitch. Now you can see the knot. It's visible. There. I want to close that in. How do I close it in? With the whip stitches. You take this, and here literally you're just going to whip it around. Take it from the right side to the left side, just like this. Here. See, I just put the needle from this side into this side. And then I did that backwards. And now whip stitch, you can do it straight across, or you can do it at an angle. Angle works better. It also allows your garment to lay better. So the first one, it can be straight. So I just went straight across and did a straight across stitch, just like that. To do an angle, you do like, just like a diagonal. You go from one side to there. And see, if this was black threaded, you wouldn't see it so well. But go, see how that is? I'm gonna try this. Okay, the seam is straight up and down. The needle is at an angle. So you're gonna do like that. And these as well, you're gonna do close together. Just try to stay consistent in width between them. And you just whip stitch it. I'll show you about an inch worth here. I'm not gonna leave these in here. That's the other great thing about hand stitches. You can take them right out because you're the one controlling the tension, not your sewing machine. And that's the best thing about finishing stitches like this. If you screw up, you know you can get them out unless you really put them in there tight. So I want you to see kind of how this looks. Now you have to imagine that this thread is black and not green, but I wanted to at least, I would have used white, but I already had green in the needle. And go like this. This is a good way to, if you have a hem in your pants come out all of a sudden and you don't have time to put it in the machine, you can just go right across there. You don't have to worry about, stitches showing on the outside because you're doing it all on the inside. And you can do a whip stitch like a blind stitch as well. You just keep where you put your needle in and out real tiny. Catch both layers, but not make it so wide. So hopefully you get to see the whip stitches on here, how they just are an angle and they just kind of like catch it in. And you do it all the way up the top. That's how, like I said, if it's not for someone else, I always do the blind stitches when I'm sewing for someone else and finishing off a seam like that. I would never do that for a customer. Family members, as long as it doesn't fall off, they're pretty good about it. So I need to find, I have some right here. I have white right here. Now the next stitch that is very helpful, believe it or not, is what they do with that little thing. I made one up for over here. There it is. I made these flower girl dresses and I made the sashes and I got done with the sashes, and the one sash I had to make it extra long. But because I had to make it extra long, I ended up having a seam because the material only went to 60 inches and I needed a sash that was 90 inches. So I ended up having to figure out a way to cover up that seam, but something decorative and cute, and I came up with a form of, it's kind of like a ribbon rose. Ribbon roses are fun, by the way, because the ribbon already has the finished edge, so you don't have to seam anything. You just gather it up, roll it around, and you have your flower. So I made some satin rose embellishments, and I put them on the sash, and they turned out so cute. But I could have done it with the machine with the largest stitch. You know how they tell you can make a gather stitch with the largest stitch on your sewing machine as long as it's loose and wide? Well, you can, unless you come across a material or a fabric that doesn't like your machine to do that. And I have had those incidents more times than I can count. And I went back to old school. People always talk about, oh, old school, that's just old. They don't do that anymore. Well, you know what? Sometimes old school will bail your butt out. It will save you. I'm sorry, that's old. That's old school too. I don't have a sponge with water on it. Probably wouldn't use it anyway. I'm just so used to doing it this way. So I'm putting a knot in the end of my thread here. And I'm just going to make a version of what I did for the flower girls. Now to make a ribbon rose, of course, the ribbon's already finished for you. Well, I took some of the fabric that came from the vest material, And I just serged the edge and closed the edges off to show you how to gather stitch to make one of these. Gather stitch, you can make your gather stitches as wide as you want, as narrow as you want, depending on how much gather you want. So, and the great thing is you've got a knot in the end, so it's not going to go anywhere. Oh. And you want to put your stitches as close to the edge as possible. And it's the edge that's basically the unfinished edge, although this is serged over it. So I'll show you what it looks like with close together gather stitches. And all you're doing is, I'm sorry, I should have done this. Okay, I'm going to anchor my thread by pulling it through, but I'm not going to pull it all the way through because that's what I want to be able to pull to do that gathers. And go in, it's an in and out. So zigzag in and out. So you go, but in a straight line, not a zigzag. So you go in, out, in, out, in, out. I'll show you what it looks like before it's gathered. So you pull that through. Of course, I pulled that little knot up there. And now you can see the little white stitches. And they're about a 1/4 inch apart. So if I were to gather this bit up right here, this is about how tight the gathers would be. You know, it's not super fantastic, but if you put them closer together like this, it's easier to make it into a flower, because the closer they are together, the more it'll roll. It'll roll better. So I'm going to go all the way down the end of this one. It's another thing. This works up so fast. People are like, hand stitching takes longer. No, it doesn't. It takes finesse. It doesn't take longer. Yeah, it might take a little longer, but it's also, you have control of every single stitch one by one. If you need to adjust it, you can adjust it without pulling them all out. Have you ever had to do that with a sewing machine where you have to take out every single stitch because of one little pucker? It's so annoying. So I don't like doing that, and I'm sure you don't either. And if you guys are beginners, you wouldn't want to do it either, because then it would like sour the taste of sewing in your mouth. Now, I pulled it. I did my little zigzags all the way through, and I'll show you. They're not all exactly the same. See? But you can see them. And they're pretty consistent, except for a couple in the middle there. And then all you do, since there's a knot in the end, you can either just let the knot catch it, or you can hold on to the knot, right? And you take this and you just get it as tight as it'll go. Okay? So I'm going to do it all the way to the end. Now, I have that really scrunched up. Okay? And you're like, well, how do you make a flower out of that? You knot it off on the other side. And you only have to do it one time, really. Now, this is where you get to do the flower part. You roll it. You roll it around on itself, just like this, and roll it around. And then, if you have a little string, well, I clip the threads at the very end. So now that I've rolled it around on itself, I have like a little bud, like a little flower bud. See? Like a little flower bud. It's all right. And what you have to do at this point with it is you're going to keep your needle and thread attached, and you go in from one side to the other, all the way through all those layers. If you have never used a thimble, I suggest getting one for something like this, because you never know how the fabric is going to react to you shoving that needle over there. It might fight you. And the other trick is you got to hold this tight until you can get it like really, really anchored in. So, and you want, again, you're trying to do these stitches back and forth, as close to the bottom as possible. Just like this. And as you do that, as you cinch it up, it starts to take better shape. And you don't have to worry about the raw edge, really. I mean, if you're concerned about it, you just tack it together. And just take a couple of those little whip stitches I showed you and just whip stitch it together. Now, when this little guy's done, like this, these little rows, done it? Then to attach it to your garment, you would just take your needle and thread. You haven't even taken this out yet, have you? You don't have to. You can, but don't need to. This way you can take it and just whip it right on there. Stitch it right on there. Tie it off on the backside, and you're done. Isn't that wonderful? I love these little things. Okay. Now, you ever heard of tailor tacks? I say that a lot of times and people go like, what is that? Well, have you ever had a fabric that was either so delicate or thin or the weave was loose and you had to put darts in it? You just have to. You're like, I want to put darts in it. Well, sometimes you got to put darts in fabric that's not very forgiving. So once you have your darts marked on your material and your fabric, the next thing you do, of course, is you pin it. You pin it, but before you actually sew it, if you didn't have that, let's say you'd have a material that you don't want to use the marking pencil on or the chalk or whatever, because you've noticed that it doesn't really come out very good when you try to wash it out or take it off. So let's pretend that I've got a pattern sitting on top of this one. Actually, I've got the pattern paper right here. And this is how I would do my tailor tacks. Come here. It's not going to hurt this pattern anyway. So on this, I'm going to put my little my dart picture on here. Okay. Put that little dart picture on there. And we're going to go like this, and there. So this is we're going to pretend like this is my pattern, and I need to mark this dart. I got to, but I'm afraid that the marking pen is just going to not wash up. I've had trouble with that before, and I can't risk it because this isn't being made for me. This is for somebody else. Or this is for a special occasion, and I don't want it to be visible. Okay. There's my pattern on my project. There's my dart. Instead of using the tracing wheel and the wax paper, tracing paper that might or might not come out, you use tailor tacks. The way you do that, and typically, you've got a dart that goes onto the front piece and the back piece. So you want to make tailor tacks in both at the same time. So you don't have to keep sliding paper in and out. And the benefit to doing tailor tacks is when you go to sew your project, you do not have to worry about marks left. Once the dart is sewn, you pull the tacks out. So to do a tailor tack, wherever your dots are on your dart that you have to, match up, you take the needle. Now you can go from the bottom up. I go from the top down because that way I can see where it's going. And you put it in the first dot that you're going to do a tailor tack for. And you pull it through, but not all the way. There's no knot in the end of this thread, by the way. You're going to pull it through until you have about 2.5 tail. Right here. About 2.5 inch tail. Now from the bottom, come back up in that same dot. Come up like this, okay? And that you come until it's snug, and then you stop because you don't want to pull your threads out. Just be careful, don't pull them out. Now we're going to go back in again. You're going in and out 4 times. So in once, up once, back in again, and not all the way. You're going to leave a loop that is about the same length as the tail that you started with. And then when you come back up for the last time, in the same spot, okay, you should end up with, see if you, let me hold something behind that so you can see it. You should end with don't know if you can see that or not. There they are. You've got 2 loops, and then you're going to end up with 2 tails because I'm going to cut the needle away from it. Except I left the scissors over here, didn't I? Yes, I did. So when you cut a tailor tack, you want to hold on to this. You cut that needle free. You end up with 2 loops, 2 double loops, and then the 4 tails from the 2 ends. And you put your scissors in the ends of the loops to make sure you're holding the whole thread from the back side to the front. Otherwise, you'll pull those right out and it'll be like a wasted time. And cut that one. Okay, so you're going to do that for every single spot or dot on your dart. Then you can take your pattern off. Take the pattern off. Okay. And we're going to imagine that the other tailor tack's on the other side, okay? So you're going to come out with it, and you're going to have tailor tack here, 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 and at the top. Everywhere there's a spot, a circle, you're going to have a tailor tack. This is the tricky part. You have the same dart for the back piece. So let's say this is a front piece of your pattern, this is the back. So to make sure you have a tailor tack for both still intact, no pun intended, you're going to lift this layer to where in between you have about half. So you want to be able to have a tack on top and one on the bottom. If you hold on to your ends, so you still have about an inch or so on the outside, and you have an inch on the inside, you just snip it. And now you have a tailor tack on the top and one on the front, one on the back. So let's go like this, pretend like this is that. These are the 2 halves. So now you can safely, with this, do your darts, pin them, you stitch them. When you're finished, I'm going to kind of show you how it looks in a way. When you're finished with the dart and it's sewn, and you open it right side out, and you'll see these little, I call them little white hairs, the little threads from the tailor tack. You know how you get rid of them? Just like this. Just pluck them. You pluck them like feathers, and then it was like it was never there. Now those are neat. I mostly use those for the delicate materials, or if I'm concerned that the weave itself might benefit from it. So that's what I would use them for. Now there is a lot of times when you have to put elastic in something, whether it be a pair of pants, the ends of sleeves, that sort of thing. And have you ever, you're feeding that elastic in there and you're like, can't this thing pass this point? It keeps getting stuck. It won't go through. Well, you can solve that problem using a machine, or you can do a hand stitch. It's up to you. I think that hand stitches sometimes are faster because you don't have to use as many stitches. All you need is like 2. The reason why the elastic does that, it stops, is because it comes to a seam, like the side seam in a pair of pants, and it comes across all of this, this seam allowance thing. You're trying to put it through there, and it's hitting this, and this is bunching up, and it won't go, and you can't see inside there to see how to fix it. The way you do fix it is, like I said, you can do it 1 of 2 ways. Most of your instructions will say, with your machine, stitch so far down, where you would stitch you'd press your seam open first, and then use a machine and stitch that. You could do that. Or you can take your hand needle and do the same thing, but real quick, just go like this. Go in and out and stitch that down with a couple of big stitches or small ones. That's up to you. And it's tacked down. That's a tack down stitch. Tack down stitches are great all over the place. If especially areas where you know there might be some stress to it, you just want to give it a little extra strength. Use some tack down stitches. But for prepping for elastic insertion, it's great. If you're practicing your hand stitches, and just to make sure that you're being consistent, if you're sight challenged like I can be more so than other days, one of these little magnet guys, or not magnet, excuse me, magnifying glass. Yeah, I have magnets too. Is invaluable for seeing stitches like this. If you have to use a seam ripper to open up something that you're either changing, like if you're changing a seam, if you have a delicate material like chiffon or like silk, anything that really will lose its shape very easily, you need to make sure that you can see the stitches that you're using your seam ripper for. If you can't look at it with the naked eye this far away as normal hand stitching or sewing distance for your projects, if you can't see those stitches clearly, make sure you use a magnifying glass. Save yourself a bunch of headaches. And if it's not very well lit, and this is why I like this little station thing. This is actually for jewelry making, and it's great for hand sewing. I have a little flashlight, and this little part here where you can like put like a glue gun or something. I put my light in there, and it illuminates the area that I'm having to use the seam ripper for. Yeah, I came up with that all by myself, that idea. I said, ooh, my flashlight fits in there. So you get one of these little 99-cent flashlights, and you stick that in there, and you can see your stitches, and you don't have to worry about ruining your fabric or ruining, the garment that you're working on. You won't mess it up. There's just no way you can mess up with the proper tools. That's the key, proper tools. That's why these old hacks, these old stitches are so invaluable. They're precious. I still go back to these. Stay stitching. If your pattern says stay stitching, you better stay stitched. There's a reason for stay stitching. A lot of people say, oh, I don't ever do that. It's to use with the fabric that the pattern suggests. And the people that make those patterns know that a certain type of fabric, if it's in a neckline area, that type of fabric will stretch over time, will lose shape, or because it's a stress point, you run the risk of just the whole thing going, just being not lasting as long as you'd want it to. I always do my stay stitching. I didn't like doing it either because you feel like it's an extra step. Yeah, it's an extra step, but it's an extra very important step. There are times when you need to do a certain type of adornments, and I'm getting ready to adorn a gown for myself, and I'm actually going to share that with you all in one of my next videos. It'll be before the wedding, and the wedding is in less than 11 days, guys, and I am putting an applique onto the front of this gown, and it has I'll show it to you. As a matter of fact, I'll show you what the applique looks like. I got a really great deal on a really lovely evening gown, and I'm so short. I had to I've cut off 7 inches, and it's still too long. I'm going to have to cut off another 4. But I found a gal who sells these. These are mostly used for dance wear. You ever seen Dancing with the Stars or what's the ice skating competitions, things like that? They wear those real revealing kind of outfits. They look like they're not wearing anything. Well, that's what these beaded appliques are. And this most mainly is for a petite person to have it upside down. I mean, if I was going to use this just like it is, it's basically for petite, for on front. And so what I'm going to need to do is separate these two to make it look the way I want it on the dress. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do. It's how to apply an applique to something to dress it up, doll it up, and give it some glamour. I love making things glamorous. But when I got this, I got it for some lingerie I was going to make, and I go, I have a green dress. I got a wedding, so I'm using this. So this is going to go in my gown. I don't like the way the sleeves are because they're not really sleeves. They're like straps. There's a strap, and then another one falls off. So what I guess is I'm going to be using a lot of these stitches for that reason. I know that I'm going to use tack down stitches to initially tack this down onto the evening gown, and then I'll go and do the final stitching part of it. I haven't decided if I'm going to change the shape of the dress. I know that I'm going to put underwires in it. So if anybody wants to know how to put in underwires and something that doesn't have it and what the benefit of it is, I'm going to be covering that. And there is also the inserts, the padded bra insert items, that there's different kinds. So those definitely need some hand stitching applied to them, because you're not always going to be able to get in and around certain corners with a sewing machine. You just can't. You can stitch as far. Now, I know in the pattern instructions, they make it look easy. They make it look like, oh, you can do this and you go all the way to there. Yeah, they lie. But case in point, the vest, when they tell you to stitch the outside together and then stitch the inside, and you have to do the inside by hand, I stitched too far, and I had to take stitches out because the machine went too far and it caught the inside layer, which messed it up. And so, of course, I had my magnifying glass out and my seam ripper, and I was yelling at the pattern. But these are really valuable items and tools to use. I learned them way back when, and long time ago. Let's see, 50 years ago? Yeah, about 50 years ago. Oh gosh, I'm getting old. So you have your invisible finishing stitch or your back stitch. You have the cast over, the whip stitch. You can also use the cast over or whip stitch on the zigzag edges. Like some people don't like, I have a piece up there somewhere. I just had it in my hand, where they don't like the that edge, that serrated edge. And so I don't know. I mean, that'll keep it from fraying, but if you whip stitch the edge, it'll also keep it from fraying even more. And then you have your tailor tacks for marking the darts. That's, it's a must. Also, the tailor tacks are great for marking where you have to place a belt, like on the vest here. Before I, turn it right side up, I had to place the belt in this particular spot. I had marked it, but then when it came to sewing it together, I needed to make sure that it was in the right spot. So using the tailor tacks and putting it between those made it easy. So these stitches help make it easier for you to make something that looks gorgeous. Tack down stitches for elastic. Yeah, definitely. You can do them with the machine or you can do them by hand. Your pattern instructors will say, here's how you do it with the machine. You can go for it. I mean, if you're in a hurry and want to do that, but I like doing the hand because then I know that the tension is my tension. The machine's tension changes all the time, seems like. So if you use your own tension, you don't have to worry about it. So I'm going to finish my husband's tie and his vest with my invisible stitches. And yeah, I'm going to use the invisible stitches on the vest because I just like it better. There, it's also called a hand blind hem stitch, if you want to know. So using a blind hem stitch for lots of different things. And once you get the, you're going to love it. I know I do. So this is my passion, my joy. And that's what I do, and that's why I share it. And I'm your Sew It Seamstress. Please hit that like button for me. Give me a comment. Tell me if there's anything else that you'd like to know about these hand stitches. Are there any other hand stitches that I can share? Because I'm sure there are. And then, of course, please subscribe and keep me here so I can keep showing you all the tips and tricks I've learned over the years. God bless.